Hi, this is Meg Riley in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you're here for another hour chatting and learning stuff all about what's going on in the world on the VUU. Let's have our regulars say hello. Joanna?
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford, and I am here in sunny Austin, Texas.
Hey, it's Hank Peirce. I am in sunny but windy Medford, Massachusetts, and yeah, that's it.
Hey folks, Bob LaVallee dialing in from Buffalo, New York.
That's great. And today we have two special guests, Heather Concannon, the assistant minister at the UU Church in Sherburne, Mass., and John Gibbons, the senior minister at First Church in Bedford. I'll introduce them again formally when we move on and talk formally about their exciting antics there in Massachusetts. But meanwhile, Hank, what's up where you are?
Well, I am. I'm just finishing up my second year of ministry here in Milton at the First Parish Church in Milton. They have called they've called Lisa Ward to be their next settled minister, and so the church threw a really great going away party for me last Sunday. Uh-oh, did I just get muted?
No,
oh,
we
am I
can hear
good?
you.
All right.
That's fine.
And the church. Okay. And so they threw this great party for me, which, like, I don't know if that means that they really appreciate what I did, or if they're just really glad to have me go. But either way, it really was wonderful. It's, wonderful to that whom you don't necessarily think you have made strong contacts with, especially as an interim, that folks are really appreciative of that. People come up and chat, and it just sort of reminded me how important it is for members of congregations just to play well with your clergy, treat them well, and that is a really important message to remind everyone. It's certainly a message I remind congregations, to holiday time, to send your minister at least a card. If you don't get them a gift, send them a card. It'd be so nice, having been at churches where you didn't get anything. So it's nice for folks to appreciate what you do.
You're breaking up a little bit, Hank, but we got that. And there's something about good goodbyes that I just think is really important for everyone. I asked some lay people in a covenant group, what's an example of a good goodbye that you've had, and a couple of people really said they couldn't think of any at all in their lives. And so whether it's ministers or tons of other transitions going on right now. CLF is in transition season. Our learning fellows come and go, and we are in ordination month. We have one a week. It's really like June is wedding month and ordination month. So
you're not rid of me yet, though, Meg.
No, not you. Bob's staying through August. But Jordan Nelson Long got co-ordained this past Sunday by CLF and All Souls Kansas City and the Lawrencetown UU Fellowship. Lawrence, Kansas, not Lawrencetown. I don't know where that came from. And Cassandra Hartley is getting ordained this Sunday in Ann Arbor, and then the following week, Shauna Foster is going to get ordained at GA. So it's just kind of something going on. Yeah, Saturday morning, that'll be really fun. I'm sure, knowing Shauna, there will be some surprises. This is the woman who got married with a Sound of Music theme. And they sing "How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria" as she processed. I think we can count on her ordination to be interesting.
9:30 Saturday morning. Don't miss it. That's going to be a good one.
So, yeah, that's what's up with us. I wanted to also say last night was very cool. Two CLF folks, Lena K. Gardner, who comes on a lot with Black Lives of UU, and Danny Gibbons, who wears a lot of hats, including being the CLF prison chaplain, got huge accolades at the seminary here in the Twin Cities for their work around racial justice and linking the faith communities up with Black Lives Matter and other racial justice groups. And it was just really exciting to see them get named, and they both made really wonderful speeches that I wish had been taped because they were amazing. And yeah, I was just really proud to sit there and be happy. So cool stuff going on here, not to mention no bugs in the garden. Jinx, I hope not. But, you know, I'm a gardener, and before the mosquitoes and gnats come out, it's just heaven. And afterwards, it's hell. So I'm loving it.
Speaking of the movement for Black Lives and GA, I just want to put a shameless plug in for the Black Lives of VUU program track that's happening at GA. So they have sessions on both Friday and Saturday that tie together, and I strongly recommend folks check it out. I think there's really going to be some excellent work going on there.
Yeah, that's going to be a really interesting thing at GA. A lot of folks coming in. Black Lives UU is bringing in a bunch of people. The UUA board agreed to raise $60,000 to support Black Lives of UU, and they're, I think, about halfway there from what I've heard, and we're all going to be asked to pitch in at GA. But Joanna,
right. They're actually bringing in at this point. I think what I understand is that at least 30 people of color who are coming to GA who've never come to GA before, partly because of financial means, and this scholarship is making that happen. So it's really an important way of like truly expressing, you know, our diversity as a faith. And I'm so impressed by that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it too. One reason is that our incoming learning fellow, Amanda Weatherspoon, wasn't going to be able to come, and now she is. So she'll be helping. She and Danny Gibbons will be running a healing space for Black folks and people of color during GA, because, as we know, stuff happens at GA all the time. So it's great. I'm really excited by this programming that's going on. Joanna, what do you know? Texans doing anything right now?
Mine's just personal. As part of a liberal repatriation act, my brother and son and husband are kidnapping my parents as we speak from New Mexico and moving them down to Austin. My three men rented an RV and drove through the night. Got an email this morning saying that they had made it there. So I'm kind of, you know, what I've been telling some of my friends is, because we've been working towards this, moving my parents here. They're 85 and 86. Shh, don't tell anyone that I shared my mom's age. We've been working for this for so many months, and it's kind of like when you're pregnant with your first so much, and you're like a couple of weeks away from the birth, and you suddenly stop and go, oh, I think my life is about to radically change. And so that's kind of where I am, and I imagine they are too.
So they're all going to drive back in the RV together? I think a movie could be made about this.
No, so it's actually, so my dad has had health issues, so he needs to be in an RV. So my brother is driving, my dad and my mom in the RV. My son is driving one of their cars. My husband is driving their other car, and they're caravanning in one day. Tomorrow morning they get up at 4 a.m. and just straight shot from Albuquerque to Austin. So, you know, prayers, light a candle, all of that stuff. Sacrifice a goat.
It is a movie. Liberal repatriation. The epic begins.
Yes, exactly. Hey, we'll do anything to get 2 more liberal votes here in Texas.
Well, I'm just picturing the different music choices in each of those vehicles.
Yes, a whole lot of rap in Jackson's, and who knows in the others.
Oh, very interesting. Well, gosh, we're hitting the end of the year. I can feel that everybody's kind of clawing our way to shore about now as we come up towards GA. And Bob, you mentioned what you were looking forward to at GA. I'm curious what everyone else is excited about at GA, including John and Heather, if you want to chime in.
Well, I'm not going this year, so I'm looking forward to waving at y'all online.
Oh, you're going to come online?
Sure.
We just learned that you can only chat online if you register. So you can live stream events, but you can't have a conversation about them unless you're registered. So,
well, except on Facebook and Twitter and all the other ways we always chat.
This is what CLF is working on. Like, how do we support our folks to go who aren't going to register? And, you know, so yeah, lots of that. Heather, are you going?
Heather may be frozen.
I I think so.
Or she's a really excellent.
He's pretty motionless.
Maybe she's meditating. I don't know.
Well, while she figures that out, I'll say that yeah, I am going to GA, and I'm looking forward to it in as much as I don't have much heavy lifting, and that feels good. I will have the opportunity a couple of times to introduce the new head of the service committee, Tom Andrews. I chaired the search committee for Tom, and I was actually suggesting to Bob before the show that it would be good to have Tom on this show, and actually good for Tom to watch this show as he gets up to speed and in understanding what the current issues in Unitarian Universalism are.
We are an all-purpose source of knowledge about all things Unitarian Universalist. It's really, when you look at the breadth of the programming we've had, it's really quite incredible.
And just for something altogether different, just to check in personally, I've already today had my 20-mile bike ride, and that probably is the peak experience of my day, with all due consideration to the peak experience I'm having right now. You know, the bike ride is what keeps me sane. I've got later in the day, I've got a memorial service for a 33-year-old kid who grew up at First Parish who OD'd last Saturday night, and you know, that's well more than a kick in the head. And my year has been actually bookmarked by traumas like this. Last August, there was one of my young people who has mental health issues, who got into a tussle with his father. His father called the police. He went out on the front lawn. The police came, and the police shot and killed him. And just, you know, unbelievable things like that have happened. So you need to have a bike ride to break these things up sometimes.
John, I'm so glad you have bike riding to keep you ministering. That sounds incredibly awful. Incredibly awful. We read these statistics, but when you know the families, it takes it to a whole different level. So where do you ride your bike from there?
I ride my bike from Bedford up to Carlisle, and sometimes I'll stop and chat with Diane Miller at the Carlisle Church, and then from Carlisle I zip over to Concord, and I always detour in there. And a couple of days ago I saw Howard Dana riding his bike into church from his house in Maynard, and I'll schmooze with the church sexton in Concord and see what's cooking there. And
you
then
swing by Walden Pond?
Get home. Huh?
You swing by Walden Pond to get your...
Well, that's actually a little far out. I mean, I go by Ralph Waldo Emerson's house, and every morning I say, "Good morning, Waldo," and then I go by the Hawthorne house and Alcott House and all of that theme park stuff that's in Concord.
You ever come down to Sherborne?
I should get all the way to Sherborne, yeah.
There are awesome bike riding roads down here. I don't ride on them, but I drive past the bikers very, very carefully.
Thank you.
There's all these little hills. People love them. So.
Well, since our guests have been part of the conversation, let me introduce them. We have with us today Reverend Heather Concannon, Assistant Minister at the UU Church in Sherborne. Am I saying it right, Sherborne? I can't quite, this Texan can't quite get all of your Massachusetts names. She's also
a curveball.
Yeah, she's also a resident of the Lucy Stone Cooperative in Boston. And we also have John Gibbons with us, Senior Minister at First Parish in Bedford and chaplain to the Bedford Minutemen Company.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!
So y'all have been in the news this past week. It looks like UU ministers and others took a firm stand against a proposed pipeline that looks very urban. Can you describe, first of all, the pipeline itself, where it goes from and to? I think when I think about pipelines, I think about rural North Dakota, but this It seems like a horse of a different color. Can you describe the pipeline for starters, and then what you did about it?
Heather, you take it.
Great. So the pipeline's part of the Algonquin Incremental Market Pipeline System. So this is the West Roxbury Lateral Pipeline. West Roxbury is part of the city of Boston, and it's to the west, kind of at the edge of the city of Boston, one of the neighborhoods in Boston. So the West Roxbury Lateral Pipeline.
West Roxbury kind of famous within Unitarian Universalism for some reason.
Theodore Parker was the minister in West Roxbury. The Theodore Parker VUU Church has been hosting these trainings, actually. Yep.
Never heard of him.
So, you've never heard of him?
I'm sorry, I just graduated from seminary, so I had to.
Don't see the MFC quite yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen the MFC yet, so maybe I should keep my mouth shut.
So the pipeline is a 5-mile, the West Roxbury Lateral Pipeline is a 5-mile segment of that pipeline that will be bringing high-pressure fracked gas from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts. And part of what's so concerning about it is that, well, first of all, new fossil fuel infrastructure, and it'll be bringing high-pressure fracked gas into the city, and is putting a lot of resources into new fossil fuel infrastructure, which we know is contributing incredibly a lot to global climate change. And we also, the other concern with it is that because it's a high pressure pipeline, it is very dangerous in terms of explosions, and it runs right past this segment of the pipeline, runs right past an active blasting quarry, so the chances of explosions increase tremendously when it's running by this blasting quarry where there's already blasting and explosions happening. Yeah, what would you add to that, John?
Well, I think that the motto of climate activism right now is to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And so the overall picture is that supporting and encouraging and expanding natural gas is contrary to our long-range goal of sustaining renewable energy sources and encouraging their development. What's interesting to me about the West Roxbury program is that it is thoroughly opposed by the area residents and by the area governments. The city of Boston has taken Spectra Energy to court to try to stop the development. Mayor Walsh is opposed to it. The selectmen in Dedham are opposed. I think they have been arrested in acts of civil disobedience themselves. The whole thing is being sustained by this nebulous federal agency called FERC, F-E-R-C, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which seems to be in the
what a horrible acronym. FERC.
Yeah, FERC.
That's just right up there with bad.
It seems to be in the pocket of the oil and gas industry, and they are the ones that declare eminent domain. So this huge thing is going right down the main roads of Boston and Roxbury, and the area residents are opposed, and the police who arrested us are opposed to it. Just everybody is opposed to it.
The police, and even the police union there, was really opposed to this. How do the police figure in? I mean, that's really interesting.
Well, go ahead, Heather.
Well, this is all, what I know of this is mostly through hearsay and largely through this action. But from what I understand, there's sort of a division in the police force around this. In order to be a Boston City police officer, you need to live in the city of Boston. And West Roxbury, I think, is a place where a lot of police officers in the Boston Police Department live. So there's sort of this not in my backyard kind of aspect to this particular proposal, and From what I've heard, Spectra has had a hard time getting off-duty police officers to do the work of patrolling and the traffic control because police officers are just not in support of it. So
that is really interesting. So tell us about the action.
Well, let's see. You fill in for me on this, Heather, as well. But this is only the second time that I've been part of this. There have been protests that have been going on at the construction site through the fall. 3 of my parishioners, among a bunch of others, were arrested in the fall, including our colleagues Martha Niebank and Ann Bancroft, and maybe I'm leaving somebody out. But there have been activities there for quite a while, and this action 2 weeks ago was coordinated by a local rabbi, Shoshana Friedman, and she put out a call to clergy, and 16 of us were present and arrested, and that group included UUs, several UUs, as well as Baptists and UCC. The area director for the UCC was among us, a Buddhist, a Hindu, you name it, they were there. And so it was a real mix of folks. We had a gathering worship service at the site with prayers and songs, and then we marched toward the pipeline construction, and at some point we ducked under the do not trespass ribbon, and we were there by the trench, and most everybody was sitting with their legs dangling into the trench. Heather was doing that, and Martha Niebank was standing, and so I was standing as well. I was in my 18th century Bedford Minuteman parson costume, and I decided to give you just the slightest flavor of that by bringing my parson hat here. And this is what makes me look like Guido Sarducci.
Now, does that come with your pulpit? Like, is it a requirement of the next?
No. This is I did this with my own free will.
Massachusetts thing.
Yes. So I'm there. So I'm there with frock coat and buckle shoes and knee pants and spectacles and all the rest. And there we were by the trench, and everybody made personal statements of why they were there and what was meaningful to them about the action. And people spoke about their, grandchildren and the others that they wanted to have grow up in a sustainable world. And for my part, I ranted in Bedford Minuteman fashion, about just how we held off the interloping British who were not wanted around here, so we held off the Spectra Energy and they should go away, and huzzah, huzzah, and stuff like that. It was a moving experience.
And John, I have to say too, it also got a fantastic photo of you and a description of what people were doing on that day, which wouldn't necessarily warrant a as good a photo or as large a photo. It was a really big photo in the Boston Globe. I don't know if it was in the Herald or not, but it was a great photo, and I thought, people were going like, "What is John doing?" And I said, he's getting this, this out to, and into the press and into and other people's screen.
Well, there's something to that. I mean, as I say, this protest had been going on for months and months, and everybody was doing their best to wear their stoles and their collars and stuff like that. But there was something photogenic about the Minuteman get-up that did get press attention and was
thinking. Fred Garcia always does the 5 C's to get media. Conflict and contradiction and colorful language and cast of characters and controversy. We could have costumes as the 6th C.
My ministry often is in need of props, and so I'm not averse to funny hats.
There you go. No, it did work. Now, So it sounds like construction is just really moving along. Is there any hope of actually stopping this thing?
So the City of Boston, the City Council of Boston unanimously voted to oppose this pipeline coming into Boston. As John said, FERC granted eminent domain to Spectra to take over the City of Boston streets, basically. And I believe that the city is continuing to challenge this in court and trying to stop it through legal pathways. I think that's part of the reason that civil disobedience, I mean, construction is continuing, and I think part of the reason that civil disobedience is so important in situations like this is that when the will of the people is to not have something happen in the space that they are governing and living in, and still the legal pathways don't allow us to stop it, I think that there is almost a moral imperative to find other means to communicate that and to try to stop it. So I actually feel hopeful in that. I think the call is so clear, both in terms of not building more fossil fuel infrastructure and also in terms of the ways that people are not excited about it coming into Boston, that there feels like this really clear consensus in many ways. Obviously, there's not 100% consensus because it's getting built, but it feels like resistance to this thing that we know that is morally reprehensible to be building. Whether or not it actually ends up being built, I think it is important to be resisting it and showing up. So.
Out here, the indigenous people are having some luck because of sovereignty, specifically the White Earth Reservation, which didn't sign treaties the way a lot of them did, so is a nation. And Winona LaDuke, who was the Ware lecturer a few years back when GA was here, has been really organizing indigenous resistance because, of course, the pipeline here comes from the tar sands through, and yeah, keep it in the ground is just a huge part of the resistance. They're talking about putting a pipeline in at the headwaters of the Mississippi River. Let's just destroy the largest river in the nation. I mean, and this eminent domain thing, I mean, that's news to me that all of the local governments opposed it and that it doesn't matter. I mean, in a way, that seems like it would really build unity of a particular kind.
And I think in some ways, so before we were arrested, the 16 of us were arrested, there had been 69 arrests up to that point, so we were numbers 70 through 85. Nobody thus far has been charged with anything or paid any fines. All of the charges have gone, so we got a summons in the mail. We're going to go before a court magistrate, and when that's happened for the first 70-ish people, that court magistrate date is to decide whether or not to charge you. It's not even a charge already, just to decide whether or not to charge us, and nobody has gotten charged yet, which I think just speaks to the lack of political will to penalize protesters for this. There's very little, if it's a city arrest and the city charge and the city doesn't want it, it's kind of this like, what impetus does the city have to make it a hassle for protesters who are saying the same thing that the legal governance of the city is saying.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a very peculiar situation where the police were ultra polite to us and we were ultra polite to them, and the construction workers were ultra polite to us and we were ultra polite to them. We had prayers for police officers and prayers for construction workers. Construction workers were coming in to make sure that we didn't trip over any of their stuff, and this kind of engagement with the criminal justice system is peculiar because we're certainly just so well aware that we were treated so far differently from so many people who are loaded into police wagons and then put into holding cells. We were treated like royalty, The police officer that booked me was even a UU. I don't know if you knew about that, Heather. That it was a guy that grew up in the Hingham Old Ship Church. Was the cop that booked me, and he talked about how great it was to grow up a UU. But
Wow.
Our time in the holding cell, I mean, they divided the men and the women, and our group of men, we immediately started singing, and the concrete walls and floor and ceiling made for just top-notch acoustics. And so we sang old movement songs, and then the Buddhist among us decided that it was time to sing Blue Skies, Irving Berlin's Blue Skies, and we sounded pretty damn good.
Wait, is that a Buddhist song? I missed
well, that. Blue Skies has kind of nothing but blue skies ahead of me, and there is kind of a Buddhist vibe to it. I don't know that Irving Berlin had Buddhism in mind, but it does have a Buddhist vibe to it.
So y'all's version of Jailhouse Rock. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I will say it was a beautiful, like, personally, it felt more like a spiritual practice than I felt like I've engaged with in many months. And we also sang in the jail cells, and they were incredible acoustics, and we were teaching songs to one another across faith traditions, and we had the cell next to us, we were singing in harmony with them and in rounds, and it was a really powerful experience to connect with other religious leaders in this way. I will say, John, you said we were treated like royalty. I was surprised by how positive the interactions with the police were for myself, and I also was very aware that my zip ties, we had zip ties instead of handcuffs, that my zip ties were tied incredibly loosely, especially compared to the person of color I was with. But there was, even in that experience in the police wagon, we were like, oh, I think I can get my zip ties. I probably could get out of these. And the person of color I was with was like, yeah, it's because you're white, and it was true, So I was not unaware that there was an aspect of both being religious authorities and wearing the symbolism of religious authority, and was curious how that was perceived by police, especially. One of the things that they said in the sort of training materials was, really think about how your response to authority and police, like, do some personal work around that beforehand, because that can really come up when you get arrested. And one thing that I didn't quite think about until I was in the jail cell was the reaction of police to religious authorities, and particularly white religious authority. So it was a very...
Well, and about an issue that they are sympathetic to. I mean, I don't know that 16 white religious people getting arrested for Black Lives Matter would be treated the same, even if you were white. But.
And they came into the cell that I was in, and they were like, "Okay, young ladies, blah blah blah," and I bit my tongue to not be like, "It's Reverend young lady," for the record.
I love that.
Shout out to Cheryl Walker, who taught me that phrase. And then later came in and they were like, okay, reverends, blah, blah, blah. But it's just a really interesting, the whole thing was really interesting in terms of race and gender and age, and all of those were wrapped up in this interaction with the police.
Well, it is really interesting what religious authority brings into any justice movement, I think. And I think particularly in New England, I mean, I'm just thinking what a logical extension this is to... Don was mentioning Emerson, but their resistance to the train and everything that was happening then to destroy the countryside and the kind of early industrialization. I mean, there's a case to be made that everybody could dress up in Minuteman suits and stand around and conquer it.
We were talking about Thoreau earlier. I believe it was Thoreau who wrote Civil Disobedience and tells the story of Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, visiting him in jail, and Emerson saying to Thoreau in jail, what are you doing in here, my friend? And Thoreau says to Emerson, who's on the outside, he says, what are you doing out there? Which I just think is...
Yeah, and so...
relevant phrase for us now.
Right, as privileged of a life as Thoreau lived with his mother bringing him lunch and everything, that book influenced Gandhi. I mean, it's just so interesting the way that ripples move around the world with this. And so you never know what will emerge. But so what are the plans? Do you plan to do more of this, or what's next?
I think that it's growing. I think that, first of all, none of us can remember a time when 16 clergy were arrested in recent memory. And there are plans to have continued actions at the site. The construction is happening pretty rapidly. Maybe, Heather, you know when it is supposed to be completed, but we're in a bit of a race with the construction because it's moving right along. There are actions happening, really every day, and they're led by local residents from West Roxbury. There's a woman named Mary who has been there every day for the last year or more, and there are just inspiring local residents that are keeping up this fight. But I think that the strategy is to turn up the heat and to have this continue to grow. And I know that there are a number of colleagues that have spoken to me and said that they didn't know about it. How can they be part of it the next time around? So I'm hopeful that we'll continue.
What's the attitude of... Go ahead, Heather.
ResistThePipeline.org is the group that, Resist the Pipeline is the group that is coordinating the resistance to the pipeline. ResistThePipeline.org is the website if you want to learn more. But there is a week of escalation that this group is planning at the end of June, when many of us will be at GA, but about June 24th-ish to 29th, 22nd.
It's actually been moved to the following week, Heather, in case you want to get yourself arrested. I think it's been moved to the 29th, the week after.
That's the end of the week. So it's a full week of escalation, so they're planning more actions that week, in part in response to the nearing the completion of the pipeline. So there is certainly opportunities for people, and that is for lay people and people who are not people of faith. Clergy will be doing, having a presence there, I think, as well. So,
what is sort of the attitude of the larger community? Your neighbors and all of that. Do they know? Are they really paying attention to this? Are they just kind of resigned? Do they have opinions?
I've had a lot of conversations with people. I live in Boston, in the city of Boston. I work about 20 miles outside of Boston, but my experience with actually talking with people about this has been really split in terms of people knowing about it. I think a lot of people, I only happen to know about it because I feel like I'm plugged into activist, climate justice, people of faith communities, and a lot of people I've talked to are like, they're doing what in West Roxbury? Like people who live, a town or a neighborhood over. So it feels like people, maybe because it wasn't a huge controversy, maybe like Meg was saying in terms of getting press, there wasn't a huge fight in the city about whether or not to oppose it. People were like, no, we oppose it. So I wonder if that kind of almost had it flying under the radar because it wasn't a big city kerfuffle.
So I'm curious why West Roxbury. Clearly the pipeline has come through a lot of areas, right? Is West Roxbury as close to downtown as it gets, or why? Right now obviously construction is there, but I'm just curious how it ended up so focused there.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Heather?
I don't know. I think it went through Dedham. So I think West Roxbury is kind of like the end of it. So maybe that's part of it, right? The minister in Dedham, Raleigh Weaver, was saying that the construction is already done there. So
it is really freaky. Like I saw a thing, somewhere that pipes are going under New York City, and the densely inhabited areas that are so at risk when there are these spills and fires. And I went to a thing with some of the Congress people here who were going on and on about how trains are right now everything's coming down on the train, and that's much more dangerous and worse, so the pipeline's actually better. But, you know, when Winona LaDuke is saying, it took me 3 days to get to the pipeline with a canoe. How on earth would a truck get there to fix this if it broke, you know? And so, I mean, they're both in really inhabited areas and really remote areas, and there are a ton of them if people haven't looked at a map. I mean, we hear a lot about, you know, a couple of them, but there are just so many of these. And of course, we're all using the oil, and that's the bottom line right there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we talked a bit about. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and what also came out this past week as well was an article in the Globe, the Boston Globe, about the many leaks that are ongoing throughout the state of natural gas, and how actually, if they had fixed that, we'd have plenty of gas. One of the reasons why they say they need to put this in is because, you know, that there's more demand. But one, there's all these leaks that's causing pollution, and that causes, you know, and also a lot of gas that escapes. But it's gas that escapes in streets, and that the gas company has to pay for, and they're much happier to just sort of not worry about that, write that part off, and then worry and write that part off, and then put in a new gas line, then going back and having to fix older pipes throughout the state. But it's ridiculous amount of gas leaks that are natural gas leaks that are going on, you know, all across the state.
Gas leaks are a huge issue, and I'm just learning as I go about this, but I think that there are something like 20,000 unrepaired gas leaks. 30,000?
3,000.
Say that again?
3,000.
Oh, I've seen numbers that were even higher than that, way higher than
3,000 is documented in the city of Boston.
Oh, in the city of Boston. Okay, I think it's 20,000 across the state, and these leak methane, which is, you know, seriously warming stuff. And one thing that I hadn't known was possible is to just Google your own town and gas leaks, and a map will come up that will show pretty much the addresses where all of the reported gas leaks are. I did this for Bedford, and there are 50, 60 gas leaks. Our church is sitting on gas leaks right here, and these have been here for as long as 20 years unrepaired, and there's a real scandal behind all of this.
Right. One of the things that they've talked about, you know, we talked about the active blasting quarry and how dangerous it is for explosions, but the other concern, like immediate concern, is that in the city of Boston there's 3,000 documented gas leaks. And I saw a statistic that said, John, something like, maybe you can correct me, but something like methane gas is about comparable to coal, or slightly cleaner, but it's still a fossil fuel that we're burning. When it's burned, methane is slightly better, some people argue. I think it's still terrible for the climate, but unburned methane going into the atmosphere is something like 83 times worse than burning coal. And that because there are just 3,000 gas leaks in the city of Boston, you're just pumping methane gas right into the atmosphere, essentially.
Gotta wonder what that's doing to sick and, you know, babies and elderly people. And
Yeah.
I mean, I went up to look at the fracking sites in North Dakota a couple of years ago, just, you know, to see them, and they're just burning off all the natural gas there. So the way that you see fracking's going on is that there are these giant fires, these gas fires everywhere, because that's the cheap stuff. They just want to get rid of it so that they can get to the oil. And I mean, I just thought, this is, you know, they're just destroying enough natural gas that, you know, our grandchildren are going to be, you know, huddled around a flame desperate for, and it's just not enough profit. So yeah, it's we got our work cut out for us, people. I mean, this is
Well, one other thing I want to bring into this conversation is just the organizing element and how that has happened. There are a few churches, ours among them, that have stipended a climate justice organizer, and this is a young guy, Evan Seitz, does he live at Lucy Stone, or is it at the other house?
I cornered him and I was like, wait, I heard about this action. How do I get involved?
Good. Well,
yeah.
Evan is a kid that grew up at First Parish in Bedford, and then he worked for the service committee, and he's trying to develop his chops as a community organizer, and he's done just amazing outreach to UU and other congregations, and has really built a coalition that is unprecedented. I mean, in New England, we don't really like to collaborate with other congregations much, and we certainly are not accustomed to doing it. It doesn't come naturally, and Evan has crossed those boundaries completely, and has us working together in ways that we never have worked together before. And again, this is just building. It started with the support from a couple of congregations, the the North Andover congregation and the Bedford congregation, but now he's working under the umbrella of our state advocacy group, UU Mass Action, and again, it's just building. So it's been a really great model for how UUs can work together and leverage our influence.
What's Fred Small doing since he left parish ministry to do environmental ministry? Is he involved with this?
Getting arrested with us. He was one of the 8.
Yep. Fred was among us, and what's the name of his organization, Heather? I always blank on what it's called. In any case, Fred has established his own climate justice organization, and he's carrying on the fight and working with us well.
So John and Heather, you are both UU ministers. Is that just a coincidence, or is there a faith component underneath all of this?
Absolutely not a coincidence. I mean, I think that, from the day that Emerson looked out the window at First Parish Concord and said that he got more inspiration from watching the leaves change and the snow fall and the natural world outside the windows. He got more inspiration from that than he was getting from behind the pulpit. I think that our faith tradition has been in close alignment with climate issues and awareness of our responsibility, and it very much is a faith-driven commitment that has brought us to this point. But obviously we're not unique in this either. We share this with so many other faith traditions. It's been a great opportunity to build not only our awareness of our own faith component, but also the commonalities that we share with other traditions.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that was incredibly beautiful about this action was that we started with worship outside of the pipeline construction area, and then we walked over, as Don said, to the pipeline, and we sat down and we basically continued the worship. There was a prayer book of prayers and songs, and just continued praying for a livable climate and for the political will to shift away from fossil fuels. And for me, it feels so important to have that connection and that grounding. Part of that is that, there was a bit of for me, there was a bit of, well, there's so many directions because it just felt so integrated. And as I said earlier, it felt like one of the most sacred spiritual practices I had engaged with in a long time. And part of what was powerful about that was that it felt like this real sense of interconnection that, I cannot fix the climate myself. And one of the things that I think faith does for me and religion does for me is that it positions me as like a part of something, but not all of something. And to be part of something larger than yourself, whether it's a movement or a religious tradition, and in this case it felt like this beautiful combination of both. To be part of something larger than yourself just feels like such a holy experience. And you know, I think we talk a lot about the interconnection with frontline communities and the fact that people who are living in first world countries are often burning the most fossil fuels, or the countries are burning the most fossil fuels, and people who are people of color or the poorest people in the world are seeing the effects of it first, and to really recognize that interconnection in how our actions are affecting one another, and to take responsibility for it feels important. There was also this beautiful component for me personally of spiritual practices also in terms of singing. So my house, the Lucy Stone Cooperative, we sing really regularly. We have a Sunday night dinner and singing once a week, and many of the songs that we sang at the Pipeline, we have also sung at my house. And I have kind of eased into singing. It has, growing up, it was never a huge part of my life, but it has become a very big part of my life. And when I was getting arrested, you know, there was like this element of anxiety around getting arrested. And this moment when I was in the jail cell where I was like, oh my God, I couldn't leave if I wanted to. Like, I've never been arrested before. This is my first experience getting arrested for civil disobedience. And this really powerful experience of, like, many people don't make this choice, and I am not free to move where I usually move or how, you know, to go anywhere right now. And I made a choice to be here, and that feels grounding, but many people don't make that choice. But we kept singing, and it felt like that was just such a grounding experience because it was a spiritual practice that I had already established in my life, and because it was something that already was a part of my community. It wasn't like I need something to ground me and I need to look for it. It felt like my faith tradition had offered me this tool in times of stress and anxiety that I could fall back on in a really beautiful way.
You had a resource you could tap into.
Exactly, yeah. And it was a resource that was common across our traditions. Yeah. I was in the cell with another Unitarian Universalist minister, Elizabeth Lynn, and the Rabbi Shoshana Friedman, and an Episcopal priest.
So how do you feel like that transformed you, that experience? It sounds like it was very, very strong. Do you feel like it's still...
It was very powerful. Yeah, I don't know how yet. It felt transformative in many ways.
One thing I would add, one of the people that was in the cell with me was Jim Antal, who is the lead minister, or whatever he's called, for the UCC area. And subsequent to this action, he was quoted as saying that he believes that civil disobedience needs to be a spiritual discipline. It needs to be a regular spiritual discipline for Christian discipleship. And we may need to translate that in some ways, but I think that these actions have built our muscle and our willingness to put our bodies where our convictions lie, and for us to take actions that we otherwise would not have taken, and to step outside our comfort zones. And I'm finding it in my own congregation that there are people who are willing to do things that they were not willing to do before, that have been inspired by I was inspired by the actions that happened in the fall, and those that came before us, and I think that we're building a new ethic of what it may mean to be a Unitarian Universalist. That it's not enough to have the conviction, but to act on that conviction, and to move outside our comfort zone to make a difference.
So, because, you know, I would say we also have a lot of folks, especially with the immigration struggle, who bring up legality all the time. And I'm curious if you have verbalized a theological analysis of civil disobedience. Either of you have preached this or spoken it. Civil disobedience and what it means theologically.
I think there's a difference between morality and legality, and we, I think, as a faith tradition, know that inherently, and I think theologically we know that, and socially we don't always differentiate that as well as I would like to, both myself and it's a risk. You know, it's a risk to put yourself on the line, and I feel like and to put your body on the line, and I feel like as a person with the kind of privilege that I have, you know, I have documentation that I'm a citizen, I have white privilege, I have cisgender privilege. Like, when they sorted us into men and women, I wasn't worried that I wasn't going to go with the group that felt like the right group for me to go to. So, you know, it felt like the risks for me were low, and I think there's this I would say discernment about real and perceived risk that one needs to do around these kinds of actions. That I think the perceived risk of this can feel really high, and I think it does. You know, I don't know what's going to happen legally. I don't know what's going to happen. Things could change. I don't think they will, but I think as a person with the privilege that I have, it can feel easy to like to assess my own level of risk and what it would be like for me to get arrested as like higher than it actually is, I guess. And to be able to shift a culture to understand risk-taking for justice as a theological question, and to take those risks faithfully and grounded in our theological tradition, feels like important work for people to do, especially people with privilege.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and say, Meg, that I think I'm trying to evolve and articulate my theology of civil disobedience and what it means to be accountable to some higher purposes. And as Heather says, the risk that we encountered was so minimal. I mean, the closest it came to a confrontation while we were in our jail cell was when some of the other clergy pulled out their cell phones and decided to take selfies of ourselves in the holding tank. And the officers came in and said, you know, wait a minute, we were nice enough not to confiscate your stuff, you know, let's not be exploiting it in that way. And by the time I was, you know, out of jail, I was, you know, down the street drinking a beer in about 30 minutes. So there was essentially no risk, and that's something for me to be aware of for the next time. I mean, I'm capable of taking risk, and I haven't done it yet. So it's a growing experience for me.
Well, thanks for doing that, because obviously you risked a lot more than you had to. And, you know, we hear the horror stories, the Black Lives Matter activist who just got sentenced to jail out in California for planning a peaceful protest. We know that people with white skin privilege have a lot of advantage with these, and still yet, a lot of people don't take those risks. So thank you. Thanks for doing this work. And we have, as Click and Clack used to say, wasted another perfectly good hour with you. It's been wonderful to have you two, and we just wanted to take a moment as we finish to lift up Reverend Cynthia Prescott, beloved by many of our colleagues, who died very suddenly. She was the interim minister now at VUU Metro North Atlanta, but people knew her from all over the country, and to lift up all of those people who are grieving her loss particularly. Next week, we've got Reverend Nate Walker coming to talk about his new book, Cultivating Empathy, something timely in this election season, I think. And any other parting words from anyone?
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for introducing me to the VUU.
Yeah.
Pipeline.org. Check it out.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Meg.
Well.